All right, this is on network infrastructure, as I've said in the previous video. More in particular, it focuses on internet service providers. So, network infrastructure is a set of logical and physical components which provide or enable communication, data transfer, as well as internet connectivity. So, the way I will explain in network infrastructure is, first of all, I have to mention that it forms the foundation of all digital communication systems, and you will understand why it's so critical for me to um, first outline what is the network infrastructure, what are the several components of network infrastructure, so that you understand why it forms the foundation of all digital communication systems, which essentially allows devices to be connected locally as well as globally, right? So this internet network infrastructure consists of several things, like your internet service providers. It consists of what do you call this? Large scale data centers, which process, which store and process data. They consist of networking devices. Network infrastructure also consists of a transmission medium. So I'll start with internet service providers, which are part of this network infrastructure at large. So these internet service providers are these organizations should provide you or provide homeless businesses and institutions access to the global internet, right? So they play or they act as the middleman. They play an intermediary role between end users of the internet as well as global networks or the global internet backbone, right? So they play that middle role, right? And then there are several roles which these internet service providers play, which are very, very important. And I have to mention them so that you understand who these service providers are. And as I've said in the previous video, what their role is. So since they perform several critical roles, let me outline them. One of them is providing internet connectivity through broadband technologies. The broadband technologies that I've mentioned in the previous videos, your DSL lines, your cable internet, your fiber internet, as well as wireless systems or wireless internet. There's various of them, 4G, 5G, your cellular internet, your wireless access, um, fixed wireless access, all those broadband technologies. So they provide internet connection through these broadband technologies. So that's why in the previous video I had to, start with those broadband technologies so that they fit into this picture. So they provide internet access, as I've mentioned. The second thing that they do is assign IP addresses. Now you'll recall that in the first video, I've said something like uh, each and every device that's connected to the internet needs to be assigned an IP address. Now it's the ISPs, the internet service providers, who assign the IP address to every device that's connected to the internet. Remember, you're connecting to the internet. You're not really connected to the internet, just connected to your service provider who is connected to the global infrastructure, right? Because there are rankings in this thing. Um, they also, route traffic between end users as well as global networks, because traffic um, on networks that get congested. So they route traffic in various with various tools or technologies or methods or techniques, right? Which I will explain in the near future, right? Maintaining infrastructure as well, like your broadband infrastructure. They maintain infrastructure like your fiber internet, fiber cables. They maintain. Remember the 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 wireless transmitter in the previous video when he spoke about fixed wireless access, that wireless transmitter or the tower. And I've also mentioned this tower when I mentioned broadband technologies, or yeah, it was broadband technologies, where radio waves are transmitted between your mobile device as well as, which is a SIM card, as well as the base tower or the cell tower, which is, and as well as the core network of your service provider, right? This is the cell tower that, or the infrastructure that they have to maintain, that tower, like the fiber cables, the tower, as well as the routers. So there are many other infrastructures that they have to maintain, but the main idea is that they maintain infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, or the internet infrastructure. That's what their role. And there's also other things like email hosting, web hosting, as well as cloud storage, and domain, registering. When you register a domain name, they provide those additional services. So they play a number of critical roles as I've outlined them, right? So there are different types of service providers. They're ranked by tiers, right? You have first tier service providers. So because it's important for me to classify them and put them into different categories or different boxes so that it becomes clear, right? So they're ranked in terms of tiers. You have first tier, you have second tier, and then you have third tier internet service providers. Your first tier internet service providers, they they essentially they own this global infrastructure, or large portion of the global internet backbone, all the infrastructure uh, that that makes the internet. They own that infrastructure, and because they're in that first tier, in that first rank, they're able to exchange traffic. Let's say um, an ISP's network is congested, they're able to exchange traffic because they're in first tier, and they can do so without any payment. They don't pay anything because they're in the same league, right? So they operate globally as well. These first tier internet service providers. Then there are second tier internet service providers who essentially they purchase the bandwidth from the first tier ISPs, right? Remember the bandwidth that I spoke about in the very, very first one, the very first video, where I explained that a network has a certain capacity in order to transmit data, and that capacity is what you call bandwidth, and that bandwidth is measurable in bits per second. I remember that bandwidth that I spoke about. So they purchase these second tier ones. They purchase the bandwidth, or that capacity, the network capacity, from the first tier service providers, right? And basically they provide regional services. In other words, to provide services in specific areas or specific countries, not globally, like these first the first tier uh, ISPs, right? Then on top of that, you have tier three ISPs, or the ones like the third tier, right? Those ones, what they do is they often lease the infrastructure. They often rent the infrastructure from your higher tiers providers. They also provide local internet access to your local businesses, your local homes. So they differ in that regard. The first tier ones, they own the infrastructure. The second tier ones, they usually purchase, and they're in between. And the third tier internet service providers, they connect directly to homes and businesses and so on, and they rent the infrastructure from, or the broadband infrastructure from, their first tier internet service providers, right? So those are your internet service providers, right? So how do you actually connect to the internet? How does the internet service provider, because they are service providers, they're providing internet access, how do they actually connect you or your business to the internet, right? So when you connect to the internet, several things happen, and this will be similar to an example that I gave in the very first video, where I spoke about high-speed data networks. In there, I make an example of when you connect to the internet, or when you open a web page or a website, your device sends a request to a server somewhere in the world, right? So what happens here is that your device connects to the ISP, the internet service provider. All right. When it's connected to, obviously you have to purchase data plans like which last you maybe a day, maybe a month, or maybe a year. So you have to be connected via your ISP. Then you connect it to the ISP, and then the ISP then um, routes your request to through its network. After routing your request through its network, that your request may then it may be necessary for it to pass through several networks, right, for it to reach that particular server, the destination server. which is somewhere in the world, and it's owned by those first tier internet service providers. They own all the facilities, the servers that serve us around the world in the internet, right? And then finally, the response that you would get is basically takes the reverse path of what I've just explained. So these internet service providers, they play, critical roles in managing uh, traffic or network traffic. They ensure reliability in terms of data transmission as well as maintaining connectivity. And the next one will be on, routers, or however you want to call them, routers or routers, as well as switches, right? So it explains more into this network infrastructure. See you next time.